Say some stuff.
The Enneagram, a system of 9 things. It's attributed to Gurdjieff, whether as his creation or as his transmission of ancient Central Asian esoteric lore. And that puts me in a tight spot because on the one hand, I'm a supporter of Gurdjieff's work as a deep, powerful, idiosyncratic, integrative, transrational spiritual developmentalism. But also, I don't give a fuck about my own typology, so I never pay much attention to people when they talk about the Enneagram, except as a general evocative symbol for the transformational architecture of psyche and cosmos. But maybe that's typical of my Enneagram type. Here to set me straight on all of this is the samurai of the diamond path, the hotness-seeking spirituality, author of the self-proclaimed most accurate Enneagram test available, sheriff of personal profiling, angriest guy on the internet, and future Enneagram podcaster. It's Marshall Leon. Hey, Marshall.
I can't believe you just called me the angriest. That makes me so happy.
Okay, Marshall, the communities that we run in consist of 2 kinds of people. On the one hand, there's people who know nothing about the Enneagram, and on the other hand, there's people who know even less.
Right, exactly.
So, what's the deal with the Enneagram, Marshall?
What's the deal with it? Well, it's a weird shape. It's this thing plus a triangle and a circle. And circles, each one of those symbols represents a law, a holy law of the universe. Law of 1, law of 3, law of 7, which you probably know more about than I do.
That's possible, but I get to ask the questions today.
Being a Gurdjieffian. A Gurdjieffian. Supposedly a Gurdjieffian. There's no way to verify it.
It's just slander. It's what my enemies say about me.
He's such a Gurdjieffian. So, okay. So we got these laws, and is it really like it's attributable to Gurdjieff as like the Western popularizer, but he may have got it from the Sarmoon.
This is debated.
It's mass debated. Who debates it?
I don't know. I've never heard any actual debates. I've heard different points of view, but I've never heard them engage each other.
Well, if you read Keys to the Enneagram
No.
by Almas, A.H. Almas, Keys to the Enneagram, the book is dedicated to the Sarmoon. Who Almas, I believe, is in communication with.
Okay. Is that how you got into this, through him? Or how did you get started with any kind of interest or involvement with the Enneagram?
It might have been related to Integral. It might have been one of those. It was around the same time that I got into it, those things. But that's not interesting. So it's a 9-pointed shape figure. And the symbol itself, we know of from Gurdjieff, although Layla Bakhtiar, she wrote the book, The Sufi Enneagram. I mean, she basically says that Gurdjieff stole it from the Sufis. And she has, I know, you get sad anytime anyone says anything bad about Gurdjieff.
No, I was going to say that wouldn't surprise me at all.
He was a rapist too, you know. I read it. It's true. I read it on an Amazon review of one of his books or someone else's book about him.
Yeah. He's a rapist. 5 stars, but rapist.
4 stars, 1 star off for the. Anyway, are we going to talk about the Enneagram?
I think
So, okay, so the symbol itself may have come from Gurdjieff. Well, probably not. And it may have come from the Sufis, but
or it may have come from a mysterious Central Asian brotherhood known as the Sarmun.
yeah. Now, but the essence of the points themselves can be found in a lot of places, including Plotinus, the Enneads, and it can also be traced to. It can be found in Homer's Odyssey. That's organized around the 9 points, and then you've got the Egyptian Neteru, which there are 9 gods or forces of nature, whatever you want to call them, and those also turns out correlate to the 9 Enneagram types. So we're dealing with
formulations. I mean, if somebody likes the Enneagram, it's got to be pretty easy for them to look around at anything that has a 9 and be like, I think this maps on pretty well.
Yeah. But there's actually some correspondence in terms of like the essences.
Okay.
But that's probably a conversation for another day. We're here to help people learn about their personalities.
Why?
Which Egyptian god are you?
Exactly. And who should you date? I want to hear a little bit about why you thought it was in any way interesting. Like, well, you spent some time with it. So it wasn't just something you encountered and went, okay, that's a thing. You went, oh, I'm going to get a little involved in this. Why? What turned you on about the Enneagram, at least at first?
Well, first of all, it's a typology, and some of us just like to put everything in categories. There's actually a whole typology of people that put people in categories. But, I guess what it would probably was recognizing my personality type. And then, just recognizing all the truth in it.
So you saw yourself reflected.
Yes. I felt that resonance. And that's how you're supposed to know your type. Except the problem is a lot of people see themselves in more than one type because it turns out there's not just one personality type, there's 3. And there's not just 3 that we have 9. And then we have all the like myriad combinations and dynamics. And so this kind of gets into like my problems with Enneagram as typology, as personality typology. Because the Enneagram, as we know, so Gurdjieff didn't apply the Enneagram to personality types. He used it to choreograph his movements, the Gurdjieff movements. And because for him, it was like a living thing. He called it a perpetual motion machine. So it describes some kind of dynamic that's always in motion.
Applied to personality profiling and typology. When does that come in?
Yeah, well, so that came in with like Oscar Ichazo. And, he was he's Bolivian, I think. Right. And he went to Asia. And he came back and started a spiritual school in Chile called Arica. And as part of this school, he taught the Enneagram, but the way he taught it was he actually taught 108 different Enneagrams, or what he called Enneagons. And only like a few of those basically made it to the West, to the US. And which I believe are the fixations, the Enneagram of fixations, of passions, of virtues, and holy ideas. And somehow that all got, reduced down into 9 personality types, which are basically 9 personality fixations and 9 passions, which are like the 7 deadly sins, except there are 9 deadly sins. And some people claim that the 7 deadly sins came from the original 9. It originated in the Enneagram.
So which other 2 deadly sins would there have been?
I believe fear is one of them. Let's take a gander at the 7 deadly sins. Yeah, so we have pride, which is 2, greed or covetousness, which is 5. Well, avarice is a better word for that. It's sort of like hoarding of one's own energies. Lust is 8, envy is 4, gluttony is 7, wrath is that's a good one. Is wrath is 1, anger. And sloth is the 9. So what did we skip? We skipped 3. 3 and 6. So the 3, which is interesting that the 3 and the 6 got dropped off. 3 is deceit, and 6 is fear. So that completes the Enneagram of the deadly sins, which are actually now the passions. And the way that whole thing works is like, there's the holy ideas, which are non-dual perspectives on reality. And there's more than 9. It's just that they all sort into the 9 points. And then when you lose touch with those perspectives, that results in a particular distortion in the mind. And that distortion is called the fixation. It's like your mind is fixated at a particular point. It's like getting stuck. And then in the heart, the distortion in the heart creates the passions. And so the antidote to the passions are the virtues. The Enneagram of virtues, and then of course the antidote to the fixation is said to be the holy idea or holy ideas at each particular point. So those are the 4 of Ichazo's original Enneagons, 108. I don't think many people know what the other ones were. But so then a guy, Claudio Naranjo, I think he was a psychiatrist, and he took what he learned from Ichazo and brought it to the US, to California, to Esalen, and he like mixed it with Freudian psychology and psychoanalysis, and sort of assigned different defense mechanisms to each type, and so on and so forth. And so that became, and then he was part of a group he had a group in Berkeley called Seekers After Truth. And that's where Almas learned about the Enneagram, as well as Sandra Maitri, the Diamond Approach teacher, who also wrote some books on the Enneagram, on the fixations and passions. She has 2 books. And Almas wrote Facets of Unity, the Enneagram of Holy Ideas. So, but then all of this became like a popular movement. And a lot of the spiritual depth was lost. And it just became this like, which personality type are you? Oh, I'm a 7. I'm a 7. You're totally a 6. You know, it became like a lot like astrology. And I lamented this for a long time. Because what ends up happening is the Enneagram type just becomes another identity. When it's supposed to be guiding you out of a fixated identity. So I'll leave it right there for now.
That reminds me of there's a transcript of a talk Gurdjieff gave in 1916 or 1917 or something like that, where somebody asked him about astrology. And he goes into this long rant about how the wise ancient people designed this incredible matrix. But he comes back to saying that it was designed to show you what's wrong with you. So if you're a Scorpio, all the traits of Scorpio are supposed to be what you're opposing in yourself, not walking around excusing yourself for doing things because you're a Scorpio.
Right. Right.
But it's very natural for people to want to, make these identities. And it's hard to figure out how it's useful and how to avoid having it be some sort of narcissistic social identification chip.
Right.
What is the utility there? Like we can lament the fact that the spiritual richness has been lost and it's been reduced to sort of a personality profiling game. But let's say you wanted to use it in a richer way, or, what would you get out of it? Like, what's the point of knowing your Enneagram type? How does that help you at all?
Well, it's sort of what illuminates is like your core tendencies. So, for example, I'm a 7. We're both 7s, I believe. And the passion of the 7 is gluttony. Which is conventionally understood as like filling yourself up with food and drink, but it has broader meaning here. It's about filling yourself up with experiences. So essentially, when you lose touch with yourself, you then lose yourself in the world. And there's like 9 different ways you can lose yourself in the world. And for the 7, that involves chasing after experiences that promise some kind of gratification, fulfillment. So it's like this pleasure pain principle. Seeking pleasurable or stimulating experiences while also avoiding painful or difficult experiences. So the 7 is said to have this like basic fear of being deprived or in like some kind of emotional pain, emotional suffering. And that basic fear then compels us to start planning. That's where the fixation of the 7 comes in. That's what Ichazo called ego plan. So it's like always planning the future in terms of planning gratifying experiences. So sort of being fixated on stimulating or pleasurable experiences in the future, and then in the heart, filling yourself up with those. So that's the 7. And so the utility is then to bring awareness to the sort of programming. It's like a central organizing principle of the personality or the ego.
So it's a targeted self-awareness enhancer. But I think one of the questions, like if you were a Buddhist, say, you might say, well, okay, there's general self-awareness, and this is a more precise tool because it zeroes you in on some patterns that are particular to types of people. But what if you just zeroed right in on direct self-awareness of yourself as an idiosyncratic individual, right? Is that a more precise tool, or are there things that you're going to miss about yourself if you don't have this conceptual augmentation of your self-awareness?
Yeah, well, most people don't notice these patterns, you know? And the Buddhists generally don't focus on your idiosyncratic self, you know, your unique consciousness, individual consciousness, generally. But there's merit in like understanding the same kind of patterns. It just illuminates the same kind of patterns that come up. Now, but it's also true that we have all of the patterns. So the Enneagram doesn't just illuminate where you're at, it also illuminates some dynamism, some directionality. Because some people like to say it's not just the points that matter, it's actually the lines. Because all the points are connected, you know, in a particularly strange way. And so 7 is connected to 5 and 1. And it's said that the 7's integration point is the 5. So the 7 is usually like really stimulated, like excitable, and wants to have fun and do all, you know, it's sort of like leaned into the 3D plane, like just sort of like stuck, leaning into it. And the 7 can integrate by sitting back at 5. Now 5 is what's called the investigator, the observer. What do I call the 5? The sight. And 5s they're detached. They're detached from themselves, detached from reality. They're just sitting back and they're observing everything from a distance. The 5's passion is avarice. So which is a sort of like a hoarding of one's energies or resources. It can be physical resources or it could be energetic resources. So the 7 is always leaning into the world, into the physical plane. And when they sit back at 5, there's like a settledness and a presence that comes in. So the Enneagram not only illuminates where you're at, but where you can shift into or where you need to shift into.
people keep the same type all their lives, or could you have a different type when you're a little kid than you have as an adult? Is it stage specific?
I can give you several different answers to that. Well, first let's back up a second. They're different theories, right? So one of the theories, which has sort of separated itself from the Enneagram, because they don't actually use the symbol or the connection points, they've just identified 9 soul families. 9 families of souls. They're the ones that correlate them to the Egyptian deities. So the idea is that you come into this world and you're a member of one of 9 soul families. Okay. So that's one theory. And by the way, they type you based on, it's like by physically resisting you. Physically resisting you, and then the body assumes one of 9 postures of strength. Naturally. Everybody. One of 9 postures of strength. So there's that. And then there's like the sort of conventional Enneagram of personality, which says you have one personality type. And that generally does not change. You've got some dynamics at your point. Like I said, 7 moves to 5 in growth or integration, and moves to 1 under stress or disintegration. So you have your dynamics, but you really only have one type, and that doesn't really change. But you have a wing. I mean, you have 2 wings technically. Can't fly without 2 wings. But our personalities tend to favor one. The wings being the adjacent types. So for 7, that's 6 and 8. And then 7 is said to be a combination of 6 and 8. So that's that theory. And then there's tri-type. Because the Enneagram does, it's like all of the numbers fall into one of the 3 centers. So in the head center, you got 5, 6, and 7. Heart center, you have 2, 3, and 4. And in the gut center, you have 8, 9, and 1. So tri-type theory says that you actually have a type in each of those centers. So I'm not just a 7, I'm a 7, 9, 3. So according to that, you already come into the world with multiple personality types. And these are all actually, so the person who owns the trademark for tri-type, she just basically says that these numbers come together in some kind of unique arrangement, creates a unique kind of personality. But I'm not that aware of much dynamism in her system. What I find is that the points, those 3 types, or those 3 points in your consciousness, they're always interacting. And so me as a 793, it's like sometimes those points, like for example, the 7 and the 9 will gang up on the 3. Because the 3 is the achiever, or what I call the star. The 3 just wants to get things done. But the 7 wants to have fun. And the 9 just wants to chill. The 9 is the peacemaker, or what I call the chill. 7 I call the spark. Spark wants to have fun. 3 wants to get things done. 9 wants to chill. So the spark and the chill will actually gang up on the star at point 3. Say, no, let's not get things done. That's not fun. That's too stressful. It's not relaxing. So these are the kinds of dynamics that arise in any given moment. 7 and the 3, both very energetic, assertive types. They both want to move forward in different ways. But the 9's like, so they're always hitting the gas and the 9's always hitting the brakes. So the 7 and the 3 can gang up on the 9. So there's competition.
Is there any objective verification of this, or is that like a misguided question?
I was going to ask you to define objective verification.
Like, clearly people are interested in types, and there aren't a lot of great systems of profiling people where you're going to use astrology. There's Myers-Briggs, there's big 5 traits now, but it's not very satisfying, the kind of systems of profiling we have out there. So people reach for the ones that seem intriguing to them, and it satisfies something, and they can use it either to project their narcissism or as a lens for targeting their self-awareness. But what do you say when somebody says, well, is there any objective validity to it?
Oh, you mean like has it been scientifically validated?
Yeah. What do you think of the person who asks that?
Sure. Yeah, there's research done on it. There's research done on the individual typing indicators, the assessments.
And what does that research consist of? What things are they looking at?
That's a good question. I don't know. But it hasn't really interested me.
Yeah.
Because I'm just interested in like, what can I apply now? Which has led me away from Enneagram as personality typology. And now it's more of a typology of sort of like sub-identities or conditioned identities.
Now, is that move away from personalities to sub-identities, is that a very 7 move to make?
No, I think it's 5. I think it's like getting more granular. Because the personality types are basically just big identities that are made up of much smaller identities. And so if I can recognize a particular identity that's coming up, I know what to do with it. I can see it for what it is, and I know how to transform it too. That's getting into the alchemy. But the personality typing, actually, when people identify with a particular personality type, they miss the fact that there are all 9 points, all 9 identities operating inside them. And that's how it's really supposed to be used. I mean, that's how it's used in the diamond approach. You know, you don't just work on your personality type. You work on all 9 of them. Because these are all like 9 ways that everybody is distorted, egoic. 9 ways that happens. and
That,
you just focus on one. And
like thinking of yourself as an internal community rather than as a single monolithic identity.
yeah, and there's already, parts theory and internal family systems, and there's already like, I mean, even the original Freudian model of id, ego, and superego is already this like tripartite self, this community. It's got to be kind of a wild community, the three of those together.
So I went online a couple of months ago and I took a dozen Enneagram tests in a row. The results were scattered, but not totally random. There were some numbers I got a bunch and some numbers that didn't come up at all. And I think a lot of people who've looked into themselves find that questions that seem to be profiling questions are a little bit messy and ambiguous, and that they could take them in different ways, or that it's kind of clumsy, kind of grasping for you. You can see it grasping for you, but it's not really reaching for the right part. And then, of course, there's the general issue of whether verbal self-reporting is the best way for people to evaluate themselves at all. What's your take on what's insufficient about how the inquiries and the questions and the testing is set up? Because I know you've set some up yourself. So what's a good one? What's not a good one? How do they go wrong?
What's a good personality test?
Yeah.
Well, there's mine. And it's true. On the website, I do claim it's the most accurate. But that's because a bunch of people took it and they told me that. So I figure, okay, why not claim it then? But it's challenging for all the reasons you said. So the first challenge with creating a good Enneagram assessment is understanding the types. There's a lot of confusion about the types. As you said, there's some people who know nothing about the Enneagram, and then another group who know even less. And it's because there's so much confusion, there's so much misunderstanding. It's like people are still, to this day, trying to get to like, what is the essence of each type? What is the essence of each point? And what belongs to that point that doesn't belong to every other point or any other point? So that's a big challenge. There's a lot of confusion about the 4, type 4. It gets described in ways that are very 9-ish. So you have all these 9s out there thinking that they're 4s. 9s also think they're 5s. And there's a good reason for this, which I'll get to. Maybe. If not today, another day. So that's a big problem, is like if you don't understand the types, you're not going to be able to create questions that sort of discern those types. So that's all right. So that's skewing a bunch of them. And most of them are based on older understandings. I think mine is based on the freshest understandings of the types. So there's that. And because of that phenomenon, a lot of Enneagram teachers also mistype. And then they're just perpetuating that, and they're describing types in ways that aren't actually those types. It's like this hall of mirrors. So that's happening. And then, yeah, there's the challenge of like, so the Enneagram, there's this whole debate on, which you're probably familiar with from like integral world, of like motivations versus behaviors. And there are people, if you try to type someone from their behaviors, they say, hey, you can't do that because these are motivations, they're not behaviors. Okay. But then most people don't know their own motivations. So how are you going to type somebody a self-assessment that gets at the motivations when they don't know their own motivations? Well, you can go by their knowledge of their own behaviors. So there's a relationship, a tension between motivations and behaviors. And so in my test, actually, I combine these different approaches, like self-awareness. What are your motivations? Behavior. What are your behaviors? And then the third point is, how do other people see you? Like, what kind of feedback are you getting from other people about you? Which brings in some kind of like intersubjective data. So I combine all of these things, and hopefully that produces a more accurate assessment. But of course, there's still all these challenges, like what do certain words mean to certain people? So it's tricky. It's not perfect. I don't really like it. Typing by test. It's actually the worst way to learn your personality type, other than all the other ways. And it's funny because there's this attitude that I share, which is that like personality tests suck. Well, what's the alternative? They say, well, you're supposed to study the 9 types and like figure out which one is you. Well, that's assuming that you're studying accurate descriptions. And yeah, it also assumes that you know yourself and you're not seeing, for example, imprints of other people inside you. Because there are certain types, the attachment types in particular, it's like their sense of identity is more malleable. And it's based on key attachments. So these personality types, 3s, 6s, and 9s, the triangle types, they're going to resemble other types. They're going to have imprints from their parents, from their siblings, teachers, whatever, whoever they're attached to. Or they may identify with, they may know themselves more by their wings. Okay? Because take 9, for example. 9 represents more than any other type, like not having a self. Not having a self or knowing. Not having a self or knowing the self. So on either side, you've got 8 and 1. And so they might recognize the 1 or the 8 shining through. Because that's something that's like it's very particular. Whereas the 9 is more like in flux. It's more malleable, adaptable, changing. So this is another challenge with typing yourself from descriptions, and then you've
a cab driver by checking the person who's in the back seat.
Yeah, something like that. And then of course, like, okay, it takes a long time to really grok the types. So then what can you do? Well, you can hire an expert. And most experts are not experts. So then the only other way is to take a test. And hopefully that test sort of best approximates the types with its questions. So there's no easy answer. And in fact, I basically arrived at the point where I'm just like, your personality type doesn't matter. Like, stop wasting your time with that. Because I just want to know what is coming up right now. What's coming up right now? And like how to alchemize those fixations. So that's what I'm playing with. Enneagram alchemy.
So you're looking at 9 types of things that are coming up right now and how to transform those.
Yeah, 9 types of identities. 9 types of identities, and there are many within each type.
One of the things I noticed in taking a bunch of tests is that there were a lot of versions of the same kinds of questions. Now, maybe that's because people are just copying and pasting from other people's tests, but it also seemed to be that there were certain things about behavior that they'd decided or been trained to look for.
Yeah.
And, when you're setting up a test, as much as you feel you've moved on from testing, what are the things in behavior and even in intersubjective awareness of what's going on for you that tend to be the most telling, right? Are there kinds of behavior that don't tell us very much about your type and other types of behavior that tell us a lot about your type?
Are there certain behaviors that do tell about your type and certain that don't?
Yeah. Like, does it matter how I hold my fork and knife, or does it only matter how I am on a first date or something like that, What sorts of things are being targeted by the questions?
Right. Right. It's the motivations are really being targeted, or the core fear, that kind of thing. So like as 7s, we like to assure that nourishment is available in the form of something stimulating or yummy. So I noticed you keep sipping something, which could point to that real kind of like oral narcissism of the 7. Like, it's almost like I am my mouth. And so I'm going to ensure that I have like all of the yummy stuff available that I can just like keep consuming, the gluttony, just keep consuming reality, really. The yummy parts or the parts of reality that I perceive as yummy. So like that's one of the things we're looking for. Like the 7, we're looking for examples of it leaving painful or uncomfortable situations and going to or acquiring pleasurable experiences. It's kind of the thing we're looking for. And in my test, we're contrasting that behavior with a totally opposite behavior, with an opposite behavior of another type.
You've self-diagnosed as a 7, which is that what you call the spark, the 7?
The spark.
Now, have other people into the Enneagram disagreed with you about what type you are?
Every day.
And what do they usually suggest?
Everything. Yesterday, I was typed for the first time as a 2 in my entire life. I get typed as 9 a lot. Part of that is that like 9 it's really close behind. It's in the stacking, so to speak, the tri-type. But part of it is that I've just learned to sit fucking still. Like, I've learned to sit back and be still and sense myself. And so people expect to see this like 7. But you and I have, a little bit of spiritual development, spiritual practice under our belts. So I get typed as a 9 to I got tri-typed the first time as a 794. And then I switched that to 973. I thought I have nothing to lose by identifying with another type. And I was feeling particularly slothful at this point in my life, where I'd forgotten what it was like to be a 7, a conventional 7. And I became a 9, and I identified with 9. And I tried that on for a while. And that was cool. I eventually determined that's not my core type, but it was cool because I got to focus on all the 9-ish traits that I have. So, but yeah, I got typed as a 794. I became a 973. I went back to 794, and now I'm 793. So, and I believe you're 794, which is interesting because there are people who typed you as that based purely on 3 collages that you made, which then gets into typing without verbalization.
Yeah, I wanted to get to that because I really liked what was set up there in terms of providing visual input instead of verbal input. It seemed much more engaging and promising to me because it sidesteps some of the traps around our tendency to narrate ourselves in certain ways.
Right. Although narrating, once you know the 9 types, you can kind of get like, what's the narration you're going to be telling about yourself? Sort of like the hero story of each type. But yeah, it does bypass the conscious mind. And it gets into something more fundamental. So yeah, you made 3 collages of just images you chose and posted them to my group, and people assessed you accurately, in my opinion, based on those images. That's pretty cool. It's hard to turn that into a science, but it's like, yeah, there's certain themes or images, imago, gestalts that you can sort of discern from a person's selection of images. So there's a lot of ways to get at this stuff. Some people do visual identification. Some people will look at your face and say, oh, he's a 7. And sometimes I can do that too. So it's like all this, for me, it's like taking in all this data about a person, and I try to cover all the bases.
To what degree do you think this can be automated? How good could an Enneagram AI get versus how much of it always comes down to the personal skill, depth, and experience of a human interpreter?
That's a good question. I think I could produce a pretty good AI. Well, let's put it this way. Like if we're tracking your personality over time, or your lack of one, we're going to find all these different identities. We're going to find all these behaviors that have particular motivations. We're going to find these identities at the core. Like a good one that's on the tip of my tongue or mind is the victim. The victim it's a I guess what I might call like a leaden voice as opposed to gold. It's a leaden voice of the 6, the victim. So it's like we could track you over time and we can identify how much that voice comes up, you know? And then we could tally up all the voices, how much each one showed up. And then we've got a pretty decent like psychograph of your personality in terms of which ones are being expressed the most and the least. Like we could do that. We could get a damn good picture of your personality. And yeah, I think I could program an AI to do that.
Are there partial numbers? Like, does it mean anything to say 4.5 when it comes to Enneagram?
Well, arguably, a 4 with a 5 wing is that. Because it's like when you're fixated at 0.4 on the circle, are you right there on the 4? Or are you a little to the left or a little to the right? And if somebody's a little to the left, we call that a 4 with a 5 wing. Little to the right, we call them 4 with a 3 wing. So, sure, you're still fundamentally a 4. But a 4 with 5 flavor. There's your smile and nod. Probably the 9. The 9's just like, I'm playing a role. My job is to smile and nod.
Earth was I thinking of saying a moment ago?
Something about the Enneagram.
Yeah, you might be right about that, he said encouragingly.
What I can do. Oh, you have a question?
I'll hold my question. What do you got?
I guess I could run through the 9 types real quick.
That would probably be useful for a lot of people who either know nothing or less than nothing about the Enneagram.
No, less than nothing. So it all starts at type 9, which is weird. But there's a good reason for that. If you look at the fetus in the womb, it's a 9. Strangely enough. That sort of observation comes from...
Like a 9?
Huh?
It visually looks like a 9?
Yeah.
Or? Okay.
Fetus looks like a 9.
Okay.
That comes from a friend of mine, Dave Gray. That observation. So that's the first type is 9. It's also the last type. It's the alpha and omega. And in some sense, every type is a variation of 9. And everybody is fundamentally a 9, because what 9 represents in terms of the personality is falling asleep to yourself. That's where the whole sloth comes in. The 9 is the most interested in maintaining some kind of homeostasis, comfortable homeostasis. And so all of us, regardless of our core fixation, are all generally trying to maintain a particular homeostasis there. So we're all like
We all
9.
nines.
We're all 9s.
Okay. And what's your term for 9s? What name have you come up with for it?
The chill.
The chill.
Yeah, because 9s are the most chill. They're the most easygoing, except when they're not. And then they're the most angry type.
So what would if you were a 9, as we all are, or if 9ness was what was coming up for you, what would be the key thing to alchemize 9ness?
3. And that's illuminated by the triangle, the connection point. 3 is known as the 3 is the integration point. It's known as the integration point of the 9. And so at 9, you're nobody. At 3, you're somebody. So the 9 has to leave that like comfortable nobody space, the emptiness, where you're both nothing and everything. You're the whole. You're everybody and nobody. So then you move to 3 and you individuate as somebody. That's the move. So when a 9 notices themselves doing some kind of self-denial, which they'll do, 9s self-deny, self-minimize, self-erase, self-negate, self-diminish,
Like
self-reduce. Huh?
It's like nihilism, but it's nihilism.
Nihilism, right. But it's a comfortable nihilism. Sort of. So any of those like self-diminishing behaviors, it's like there's a decision point in that moment. When you see it, you can say, oh, I'm doing that self-diminishment thing again. What's the alchemizing move here? And that's going to be some kind of self-assertion. Even something small like, what do you want for dinner? Oh, I don't care, whatever you want. That's the 9 move, is to deny what I want. And a simple act of self-assertion is like, oh, I want pizza. Because pizza is the 9 of foods.
We are all 9s and all foods are pizzas.
Right, it's a pie. It's a circle. So
the 9 counterbalances itself with some kind of transformational self-assertion.
Yeah.
Move. What comes next after 9?
1. And 1s are very principled. They have a strong sense of right and wrong. Honesty is important to them. Integrity is important to them. Doing the right thing. being ethical, upright, pure, clean, good, righteous, virtuous. So, and their basic fear is of being like corrupted, being like a bad person, basically. And they tend to become rigid, judgmental, hypercritical of themselves and others, moralistic. And they're just fucking angry. They're angry that nothing is up to their high standards. Reality is fucked up. It's imperfect. So they spend a lot of their time perfecting reality. And so the integration point of 1 is 7. So, which can be something like noticing I'm enacting some kind of rigid standard. And so the right move may be to move to 7 to play, to become playful. Like, oh, life is to enjoy. It's not just about like putting everything in its proper place. And the 7 and the 1 relationship will reveal that tension that, two people of one person of each type in a relationship, the 1s always want to do what's proper and the 7s always just want to have fun. Which leads to all kinds of shenanigans. So that's 1.
All right, what's 2?
2 is the helper, or what I call the gift. And 2s are very concerned with other people. 2s want to help other people. And this is, a lot of women get sort of mistakenly typed as 2. Because 2 sort of like archetypally represents the feminine. So yeah, they're always invested in like helping other people and making sure other people's needs are met. But they become too self-sacrificing. Their fundamental fears of being unlovable. And so they set out to be lovable by doing all kinds of lovable things for the people they love. But they take it too far. They become pushy and manipulative and self-sacrificing, and then resentful when other people aren't meeting their needs, so on and so forth. So what the 2 can do when they notice they're doing this like people-pleasing act is move to 4. 4 is the individualist, or what I call the special. 4s are very focused on themselves. And so when the 2 integrates to 4, they're going from other focus to self-focus. Not what do they need, but what do I need? And this is very hard for the 2 because it's selfish. And selfish is the worst thing you can be.
So what about 3?
3. Do we really want to do all 9?
Not necessarily. We could zoom through it. Are they reciprocal? Like you were talking about the 9 counterbalancing itself or transforming itself with the 3. Does the 3 do it with the 9?
So
That
the
would
9 is actually in like traditional Enneagram theory. The 3 integrates at 6. And the 6 integrates at 9. Now, so what that means is like the 3 is all about themselves, all about being recognized for their achievements. You know, they just want to be, I call them the star. They want to be the star. And the movement to 6, the integration for the 3 at 6 is to then focus on the team or the group or the tribe. Not how can I succeed, but how can we succeed? So that's sort of conventionally understood as the integration point of 3 to 6. But I have identified that, like, yeah, there are times when the 3 needs to move to 9. And it has a lot to do with, I mentioned, like, the 3 wants to get things done. Like, you shoot an arrow and hit the bullseye. That's sort of like the perfect example, this representation of the 3. Like, they want to hit the bullseye. They want to get things done. Check. And they want to get there in the shortest amount of time. They like to move fast. But sometimes that forwardness needs to back the fuck up and chill at 9. You know, they need to sort of resist the 3-ish impulse to do and go. And instead, chill and be at 9. So I found it's not so clear, and this is debated a lot, actually, like whether we really just move in one direction in health and the other direction in stress, or whether we actually we can take on the healthy and unhealthy qualities of both connection points. And I found that it's necessary to kind of move backwards, like I just said, in a moment.
Why don't we accelerate through the rest of them and just tell me your word for or one sentence about each of them? 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Yeah. The 4 is the special. And it's like they're always searching for their identity. And yeah, they're always sort of individuating or hyper individuating. They're always involved in this process of me, not me. Something is either me or not me. And they're interested in expressing their unique identity. So that's a good enough explanation of 4. 4 is really hard to do justice, because everybody that just listened to me say that, they're like, oh yeah, that's me. Especially types like 9 who don't know their identity. So they're like, oh yeah, I want to be unique, you know? Except they're more like, I want to eventually discover my uniqueness. Whereas fours are just like, sort of just like hyper fixated on it constantly. It's an obsession, expressing, finding, searching, expressing my unique identity. And then getting lost in the depths. 5, we've got the investigator, or what I call the sight. And they're interested in understanding reality. Because if they don't, may not survive. You know, they don't have a lot of physical vitality. And so, because they're all up in their head. And so they've got to understand everything in order to survive. And very perceptive as a result. Very perceptive and insightful, and bring clarity to things. 6. 6 is the loyalist or the loyal skeptic. I call them the shield. And they are interested most in security and maintaining support systems. You know, they're sort of out of touch with their own inner support, like essential support. They're out of touch with their own guidance. So they don't know where to go or who to trust. But they align with certain people. They align with people and groups and whatnot for security. And then they become invested in maintaining those support systems. They spend a lot of time and energy maintaining those support systems while also not really trusting them and not really trusting themselves either. So that's the 6. 7, we've already talked about 7, the spark. The 8, I call the force. The 8 is about power and lust. Lust is their passion, which conventionally is about pleasures of the flesh. For the 8, it can and often is that. But it's more just like this, it's more like this passionate devouring of life. They're the most forceful personality, very aggressive, very short-tempered.
How is that passionate, lustful, devouring different from 7's gluttony?
Yeah, so the gluttony is about variety, many different experiences. Whereas the lust of the 8, it's not so much about having many different experiences, but just like consuming whatever experience is in front of you with gusto, right? So it's about like potency. You know, just more. 7 and the 8 want more in different ways. The 7 wants more options, more choices, more variety. The 8 wants more of what they want. More power, more money, more sex, more food, volume. So that's the eight. They have a fear of being taken advantage of, submitting to others, which creates a kind of suspicious or cynical outlook that it's just like it's a dog eat dog world. It's a jungle out there, and only the strong survive. Which you could correlate to the red V meme in spiral dynamics.
If you had a situation where someone politically or corporately was a really intense eight in terms of what they were trying to achieve, but on the weekends they're going to a dominatrix, is that an attempt to transform that? Right? Are people seeking out balance and medication in all kinds of strange
I'll
ways?
tell you a story. Yeah. I've known some female eights who are just like tough as hell, who are then totally submissive in the bedroom. And they're just, what they say is like, I'm just tired of like being in control all the time. And so, which shows that like, yeah, our sexual essence can be very different from our personality. It's almost like personality gender. So you can have a dominant eight who's sexually submissive.
Earlier, you said, and we must be coming to the end of this pretty quickly now. You mentioned that one of the reasons why your Enneagram test is so good is that it's based on the freshest understanding of types.
The freshest of the fresh.
Now, I've got to assume some of that freshness is just coming out of your own experience and depth of understanding. But where else is it coming from? If people wanted to be up to date, if they wanted to access sources that gave their understanding the freshestness, where would they look? Who do you think's on the cutting edge of this? What's a good source? Who's doing good work in this area?
I don't know if I want to answer that.
Okay. Well, then at least tell us why you're reluctant to answer that.
I don't think I can answer that either.
All right. Maybe one day we'll learn Marshall's secrets. Maybe he doesn't want us to have the freshness, except through him.
It's interesting. I was talking to somebody who has written somebody who's sort of recognized as one of the original OGs of the Enneagram. And I was talking to him about how basically how like the sacredness has been lost. Everybody's just using it as like, everyone's using it narcissistically. There's all this politics. Nobody has themselves typed properly, including many of the top authorities. And he just said something to me like, yeah, I used to be the same way, but now I think that's actually like what the masters of the Enneagram actually want to be the case. So that the secrets of the Enneagram are hidden in plain sight. And I thought, okay, cool. And that's a lot of why I wouldn't recommend any particular source, including myself, because of all the distortion you will inevitably come across. Even if somebody has a good understanding of a particular type, they may not be in touch with they may not be in touch with like the spiritual dimension of the Enneagram. So given all of the distortion and the politicking out there, it's hard to recommend anybody. But I will say this. I will say that the Don Risso's Enneagram is pretty good. He's created the Enneagram Institute. And you can read his books. Personality Types is one. Understanding the Enneagram is another. Wisdom of the Enneagram is the third. And he brought on Russ Hudson later. And then they sort of co-released those books together. So it's a good starting point.
Why don't you hold that symbol up for us again?
This is the law of seven, the hexad. Made me vanish.
Yeah. Nice. Well, I'm out of questions. Unless there's anything else you wanted to say about the Enneagram, I say we wrap this up.
It's a wrap.
All right, man. Thanks for sharing the thicket of your various takes on this.
My pleasure.